Hello there, and welcome back to JJ Painting. I know it's been a very, very long time since I last did a video, and I am sorry. I did say I'd be like, yeah, let's do more, let's make more videos, let's make more YouTube, and I haven't done that, and I am sorry to everyone. But if you're watching this, thanks for coming back, and if you're new here, then what do? Well, as you may have seen, this is our good old-fashioned Warhammer channel, so sometimes we do things about the lore, tips and tricks for painting, occasionally gaming tips and tricks, which will probably change now we're going into 10th. Oh, before we get too far into it, you probably are noticing that I've got Age of Darkness and Dominion behind me, and you're probably wondering what year did this video get recorded in. Well, it has been recorded in 2023, and there is a reason these two boxes are in this video, which we will get to later on. But we're going to do something today which is a little bit different. We're going to be talking about something which has been around for a little while now, and that is scalping on eBay. I know for a fact that everyone hates it. So I'm going to start off here now with a very quick disclaimer. As most of you probably know, I am a commission painter, and I do have an eBay store where I do sell things for profit. Now, obviously, I'm fully aware that the eBay scalper thing is doing things at leagues of magnitude different to mine, but I just want you to know that I also do sell on eBay. So I do understand how things work from a seller's perspective, and that's also so that I don't get people saying hypocrisy later on. So whilst I'm firmly on your side and the community side when it comes to scalping, I do want to just say that out now so we're all on the same page. So having said all that, let's talk a little bit about where all of this started. Where did the scalping really begin before we get too deep into the video? So when we have to think about scalping on eBay, especially when it comes to Warhammer products, one of the things that I believe doesn't get mentioned is that it's been around for quite a while, for as long as there's been eBay, basically, for as long as there has been a second-hand market. But scalping has always been quite a niche thing. It does largely appear with professionally painted or fully painted things. You do see the prices going up, historically speaking, whereas for newer models, which were still on sprue or still on box or, you know, completely untouched, it was roughly selling at what the retail price was for a long time, maybe a little bit more depending on where you were in the world. But obviously this has taken an entirely new turn in the last couple of years. And I think one of the big factors to consider has actually been the pandemic, COVID. Warhammer had a bit of a ballooning in terms of its popularity since the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and has been steadily growing in popularity over the years. But obviously when everything was shut down, everything shifted online, so the only way people could get things was by having to get it online rather than going to physical shops. So that had a knock-on impact on Games Workshop's ability to produce things and distribute them and dispatch them, and obviously it meant that people were turning to the second-hand market a lot more in that time as well, as people were selling stuff off, but equally people were buying things. People were leaving and entering the hobby at quite a high rate, but at the same time people who were already in the hobby were selling off things they didn't need or want anymore, so that's also a big factor. So with all that said and done, we now got a little bit of background on that. When did it become a bigger deal? When was there more of an upswing? Because for most of you who've been in it for a few years, you will probably remember that there was never really a massive deal, especially when it came to other introductory releases or starter releases for previous editions. So we never had this for Dark Vengeance, we never had this for Dark Imperium, we never had this for Battle of Macragge, for example, or Black Reach. A lot of dark and black and darkness. It's almost like it's in the grim darkness of the far future almost. Who would have thought that? Anyway, but getting back to the point is that I think there's something to be said for Games Workshop's change of strategy when it comes to how they distribute their models now. Before, we would generally speaking see one or two splash releases every year. Things like Space Hulk back in 2009 and Dreadfleet in either 2009 or 2010. Great examples of this. But that's not the case anymore. What we're seeing instead now is splash releases almost every month or every couple of months. And rather than being for the standalone games or one-off expansions, they're actually selling quite integral models and integral parts of their bigger armies. A lot of this is Space Marine related, obviously, but a lot of it also isn't. If you look at Cursed City, for example, and Blackstone Fortress, those both sold out very, very quickly when they were first released. And as a result, it was a very long time before we saw them back in stock. I believe they are both now in common stock on Games Workshop's main website, at least they are at the time of recording, but that may not be the case, but they did come back, and we'll get to that later as well. So when it comes to the scalper history of things, I think it's fair to say that it only really took a turn at the end of 8th edition, right just before Ghazghkull and Ragnar were released, if anyone remembers the Rise of the Beast box. Now, the Rise of the Beast box, however you feel about it, did have two very nice models in it that everyone wanted, Ragnar and Ghazghkull, and as a result, that box did actually sell out relatively quickly on Games Workshop's website. But what didn't happen was people were buying it for the rest of the box, because the rest of the box people weren't that interested in. But those two models suddenly appeared all over eBay at very high inflated prices, and it was commented upon at the time. Not massively so, because there were other things going along, but that was something which was noticed. But then if we fast forward ahead to the release of Indomitus in 2020, so 3 years ago, there was a lot of concern at the time about it being sold out very quickly. Games Workshop even made the point of saying that they'd made loads, but you had to hurry to get in there. And I think when they say that everyone thinks to themselves, well, I've got to be quick, I've got to hurry, I've got to get in there, I've got to get my copy before it sells out. So that obviously put a little bit of anxiety and a little bit of stress, I think, on the community. If they wanted it, they had to basically be there when the shop opened. Now, some places did an expression of interest form, so you could effectively pre-order it and hopefully have 1 or 2 boxes reserved for yourself if you wanted to. And then you'd be able to pay for it on the day and there would be no bother and no problem whatsoever. But I am aware that not every shop does that. So with all that said and done, when it came to the Indomitus release, Games Workshop then obviously said there would be a second wave of Indomitus. So we got that initial wave, which everyone rushed for, and which the scalpers, everyone thought correctly, would go after. Indomitus was a one-off. It was the start of a new release and a new edition. And not every release has had that Games Workshop have done. When we look at things like Lionel Johnson, for example, that was probably the most important one of recent history. And in terms of how scalping has worked on eBay, I'd probably say that was the biggest one, considering that Lionel Johnson, the model itself, and the blade guard you got with it was going for about £65 on Games Workshop's website. By the time people could get hold of it, it had sold out, and it was on eBay going into the hundreds of pounds. I'm not going to bother screenshotting on here because we've all seen it, so there's no point going into it again. And when I think it was Curse City or the new Kill Team came out as well, that sold out in seconds, and that was up on eBay in the same day in many cases. Been clearly a lot of work gone into Leviathan to stop that happening. But in our most recent experience with that, whether or not you were able to get a copy of Leviathan, whether or not you were not able to get a copy of Leviathan, is kind of a different matter entirely. But the fact of the matter was, Leviathan was a little bit more accessible than those two were, and it didn't just sell out in a heartbeat. So just to recap quickly, scalping has been around for as long as Warhammer's been around, and as long as there's been a second-hand community for it. It picked up a little bit when things were pushed more online during COVID, and for bigger, more recent releases, there's definitely been a noticeable increase in the audacity of the scalpers. They're putting up things for more money than they would have conceivably done in previous years. So where does all that leave us going into the future? Where does all that leave us? Well, I think it's important that we look at what we can and can't do in order to combat it. But the first thing I want to do is refer back to why I've got these here, and one of the things about Games Workshop stock side of things. Now, one of the things that has become quite noticeable is obviously how things are sold out. And you'd think to yourself, well, how is this possible? Games Workshop can just print more, they can make more, but it can only guess how popular something will or won't be. Let's look at Dominion, for example, at the top there. Remembering that Dominion was a launch box in the same style as Indomitus, and it came out only a year later. But Dominion was still on sale on Games Workshop's website well into 2022. They practically had to half the price of it to shift them all in the end. And if you look at the Age of Darkness box as well, that's still on Games Workshop's websites. Now, Age of Darkness is a bit different because obviously getting into the Heresy game is a very different kettle of fish, and it's got its own rule system and its own history, which we might go into another video. But ultimately, the Age of Darkness box was more expensive than the other 2 boxes, other 3 boxes now. As a result, has definitely had a very different reception to the other ones. It's the Horus Heresy game, it's the niche within a niche within a niche, so to speak. So that's one of the reasons why you'll still see it. But at the same time, you've got to remember that for a lot of us who are out there now who've been playing for a while, is that whenever we see a new release, one of the things that always happens is going, how well will it sell from Games Workshop side of things? So they do have to moderate and measure how many they print. And ultimately, from a business perspective for them, which we'll get into in a second, it is better for them to sell out and for some people to not get things, which I know sounds really shitty, and I don't like saying it either, but it is, from their perspective, one of the reasons why we see stocks running out so quickly, because from their perspective, they just need to sell enough. But then that brings us on to the next point. What can we do? What can we do as a community to actually combat the scalping? What's the thing we can do? Well, the first thing we have to do is understand what the scalpers actually want, what they're doing. And the first thing they're doing is they're understanding their market. Us, we are a captive market. Games Workshop knows we're a captive market. And one of the things about scalping is that scalping can lead to a very unfortunate thing for us, where if we buy from scalpers, Games Workshop may itself start wondering, are we charging enough? And that could, in theory, encourage them to put their prices up even higher. Now, that sounds terrifying, and I understand completely why. But we need to take that into consideration. So the first thing we can do is something we shouldn't do, and that is don't buy from scalpers at the scalper price. Don't do it. Don't engage with it. Don't even click on the link on eBay. If you own an eBay store, see how many people have viewed and are watching your items. So buying is one thing you shouldn't do, especially, again, going back to the lion, for example. If you're buying the lion on his own for £200, £300, don't do it. But don't even click on the link. Take away the engagement. And if you are willing to pay more for something like Lionel Johnson or Leviathan or the Kill Team boxes, then that's up to you. But you have to ask yourself the question, is that price worth what you're getting? Or do you not care about the price and you just want the model? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And do question if you are willing to pay at certain prices, because ultimately that's the only way that you will be able to judge what is a fair and fair price in your own mind. So the second thing we should do is be careful about what the hype does to us. So obviously we're excited to see new models come out. I'm excited, I'm sure you are too, whenever we see new releases. But the important thing that we have to do is be very careful not to allow that excitement to turn into anxiety and turn into FOMO, as it were. So we need to be very careful that we don't put anything on ourselves that says, I have to get this model, rather than saying, this is a nice model, I will get it in my own time if I can. And leave it at that. Leave it at that. Don't go any further down that rabbit hole, because that's when you eventually jump from, I need to have this model and I will pay £200 for it, rather than £30 or £60 or £50 or whatever it is. And that's a really important distinction. It may sound weird, and I know it may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but it's really important that that's how we engage with it. Because if we treat it like we have to buy everything that's released, all that will do is push the scalpers harder and give them more room, in fact, to start dominating the release schedule weekends. So that it won't be a case of you're battling to get hold of these things, but you are also then, far more importantly, giving them what they want. You are buying at the inflated prices. And I know that the scalping thing is annoying anyway, as we've established by this whole video. But one of the things we have to do is make sure that we are prepared for it. We know that it's going to happen, at least in the short term, at least. And this brings me on to my third thing. And that's something we should do, and that's be patient. As I said earlier on, Games Workshop has to make enough that it can sell and make money. But it has to also make sure that it doesn't overprint. So that's why we have this supply and demand thing, which seems to have become a bit of a problem in the last couple. But ultimately, we have to remember that GW is paying attention to what's going on. When it sees that something is selling out, that's good for them financially. But if it sees that they are selling out and they're immediately going up on eBay, and they're also selling, then like I said, they may charge more. And there's also the possibility that Games Workshop itself might increase production in the years going forward, which is good for us. It means that there will be more, hopefully there will be more availability, and we might see some differences in terms of how we see things are released. Like I said earlier, we might start to see expression of interest things come through, where effectively you sign up for the new release so that there is a copy allocated to you, for example. We might start to see second wave releases coming around, so we see a smaller initial release, like with Hexfire, for example, where everything came out and then it was gone and that upset people, and they'll move more to the Indomitus model, where they release one wave, and then they'll release another wave either a couple of days or a week or so later, just so that everyone does get the chance to buy it. Hello, Editing Room Josh here. Just a very quick point on Hexfire. It was another example of something that sold out almost faster than people realised it was online. But vitally, every single model that was newly released within that box became available in its own time. It can take a couple of months, but generally speaking, these things do happen. And this is a good sign that if things do sell out, maybe Games Workshop will be incentivized to quickly make sure that they are available for general release as soon as possible after the first wave. And we have seen this elsewhere. Cursed City and Blackstone Fortress, like I said, are now available. You can now buy them on Games Workshop's website. But ultimately, this is what I mean to say, is that for us as a community, I know it's frustrating, I know it's annoying, and I am aware that for a lot of us, it can be a bit of a pain in the arse having to get hold of models or wanting to get hold of models from Games Workshop when we can't, and then having to either wait for months or pay even more if you want them online. And that is frustrating. We have to remember, these are things we want, not necessarily need. We want to get them at a fair price as well, and we want to get them in a manner that doesn't feel like we're being scammed or being conned or being exploited. And we have to, as a result, be measured. Games Workshop might take action. Another action, a constructive action as well, is for us collectively to talk to Games Workshop and perhaps find a way for the community to work with GW on this. Games Workshop is more interactive with the community in a lot of ways now, and that is a good thing. So maybe they will listen. Maybe there is a way for this to work. But obviously the most important thing for us to do is make sure we come up with solutions rather than reiterating the problem. So as I said, the three things that we need to do, to start with, in the short term at least, are don't buy from the scalpers, be very careful how we feel about new releases and don't get too drawn into the hype. And thirdly, and most importantly of all, help come up with a solution. Help find the solution. Because that's the only way this will change. And ultimately, we want to see positive change. I genuinely believe that. But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What do you think of the scalper situation? Are you a scalper yourself and you're quite happy for it to carry on? I don't know how popular you'll be, but let us know what you think about all this. And the other thing as well I'd always say is check out my stuff below, my Instagram, if you want to see pictures of toy soldiers, my own eBay store. I take commissions as well if any of you are interested in my services. But if not, like, subscribe, all that good YouTube shilly stuff. Goodbye, thanks for watching, and have a lovely day.